the biggest uncertainty probably is the fact that things aren't going to settle down. And what I mean by that is that the digital revolution, for want of a better term, so the explosion of digital platforms, social and real-time media, I think has obviously had a huge impact on brands, media owners, advertisers, marketers. And I think there was the expectation that it was going to be a very tumultuous time as it was all changing, but then it would gradually settle down and level out. And brands and media owners and so on and so forth they'd be on solid ground again, and they could operate in the way that they have previously, but just with different tools and platforms. And I think it hasn't changed like that, because the very nature of things like social and real time are that they're constantly changing. They evolve, they shift, they move around, and the ground never levels out. So I think for me that's the biggest uncertainty, is that you can't do business in the same way that you did before the digital revolution. You have to have the flexibility, the ability to evolve, grow and adapt, so that you can operate on this uneven ground, and it's the companies that can do that, that can evolve and adapt according to the demands of consumers, or the arrival of new emerging media platforms, that kind of stuff. Those are going to be the ones that survive, I think. It's interesting for us to look at, and I'm not hugely experienced with the Indian market, but from what I have seen, I think that India might be slightly behind some other markets in terms of the adoption of new technologies, but once they get on top of a technology, then it really goes like wildfire, and it really spreads. Mobile being a really fantastic example. Just the growth of mobile in this country has been phenomenal. So I think it's because India has such a dense, active population, and they love to socialise and communicate and be in contact. I think that social media, particularly, and mobile-based social media, has really exploded, and we've just got to see the work that a lot of telecoms brands are doing here now, and that most major global telecoms brands would identify India as their main market of growth, simply because of the amount of people that need and want to be connected. So I think that's one of the things that we've seen most in the work that we've seen submitted from India to Contagious. The difference mainly is that there have been data analyst companies and strategic analyst companies for years who would look at your media schedule, your media spend across TV, print, radio, whatever, and then they'd process quite hard stats, facts and figures on what we call quant data and quant analysis, and that's literally your numbers. I think what's different about social media is that you can't measure it in the same way, because social media is just about people. It's about people connecting, sharing things, commenting, and I think that the kind of data that you grab from that is qualitative. So it's more about what they're interested in, what they're passionate about, this kind of stuff. So it's nowhere near as easy to manage, and therefore nowhere near as easy to then action upon. If you don't have these figures, you can then say, right, based on these hard figures, we're going to make decision X, Y, or Z. It's more, what can we learn from this? It's like a learning process. But I think it is really important, because you start, like I said in my presentation, seeing people as people again, not just numbers. And it's a cliche, but we are more than numbers. So I think once brands do that, the implications of social data are such that you can start to engage people in a much more meaningful way. And like I say, India being a huge, dense, but very active marketplace, I think that when brands get on top of that and start to make use of this rich social data, I think it could result in some really interesting. Just try and be sensible about it. I think don't use an emerging technology for the sake of using it, because like I say, if they've got to be careful with budget, don't say, well, this is coming along and I really think we should do it. It's a case of what works for your demographic now, what works for your consumers. Is this emerging technology right for them? If it is, then great, then use it and do it, because that investment will pay off, because you know that it'll work for them. If you're not sure, then don't do it. There's no point in doing something for the sake of doing it. It's always going to be, especially in times that are tricky in terms of budget and finance, it's always a tension between doing things, continuing to do things that work, but also experimenting with things. So I think that 5% model I also talked about is quite useful, because that's quite low risk, so you can just play with things and give a really tiny bit of portion of budget, light, very small fires. And then if one starts to grow, then you can throw more petrol on it in terms of traditional media spend. But if it doesn't work, then it's no big problem. It doesn't need to be all your eggs from one basket into another one. Personally, I don't have any expectations. I think it's dangerous to come here and say we expect to do this. We've put these targets up, these facts, figures. really are just seeing it as, you know, a kind of exploratory thing, really. Just come here, see how we can be of use, see what, you know, the hunger is for Contagious. I think the feedback today has been fantastic, but we're just going to come here and try and see what gaps there are that Contagious can fill. You know, we haven't been in a market yet in the world where there hasn't been a really great thirst for Contagious, so it's just a case of coming here, meeting brand owners, media owners, and working out what that is in India. But we've got a really experienced guy on the job, so I'm sure he'll crack that nut. The brands we're working with I can't mention because it's all ongoing consultancy and we've got NDAs signed on those. Agency networks examples, Mudra is one who we've been delivering Contagious subscriptions and a Contagious feed, intelligence feed into a while. JWT network, contracts, guys like that. We serve, again, magazine subscriptions and agency feeds into and that sort of thing. So and that was prior even to us being here. So I think that shows that there is a desire for it, you know, and hopefully we can just spread that now. One interesting takeaway that I've gotten has been that the relationships that clients have with agencies is quite different to in India than it is to other places. There are lots of agencies in the UK and US who will charge clients for ideas, and I think that in India it doesn't work like that. You know, clients will only pay for execution. So I think that in terms of a lot of this stuff, especially social, real time, that requires a leap of faith by the brand, you know, the client. I think that seeing them all in the same room together, I think that clients are going to become more willing to invest in agencies who are willing to push things and play around with things, and that they might need to invest in ideas as well as just investing in execution, you know. So that's been an interesting key takeaway for me, and I'll be interested to get feedback, particularly from Niraj, you know, here in India on the ground, to see how that relationship or that dynamic is being affected.